Hey everybody, Dr. Snellgrove here, just recording a quick overview, at least I hope it's a quick overview, of your second essay. So as I record this, I've got the description of the essay up on Canvas. It's something that you can read along with if you want. And I'm going to not read this word for word, but I'm going to give you the gist of it because essay 2 is a bit different from essay 1. All right. Essay 1 was a kind of a traditional argumentative essay where you pick a controversial stance, you take a side, you argue your side. So this essay is a bit different. You're actually analyzing commercials. What kind of commercials? So you're picking up to 3, that's a maximum, up to 3 commercials for the same company or product. So you might say, here's 3 Coca-Cola ads I'm going to analyze, or here are you could say something like, when I say same company or product, sometimes you might have a company that makes different products. So for instance, if you're an Apple fan, you might look at commercials like, here's an iPod commercial, here's an iPhone commercial, here's a MacBook commercial, and it's technically all commercials for the same company. But you want to pick your commercials carefully, because what you're doing in this essay, you're trying to figure out who is the target audience for these commercials. And I'm going to emphasize this now. I'm going to keep emphasizing it. Y'all are probably going to get annoyed by me, but this sometimes confuses my in-person classes, my in-person students. So we're looking at up to 3 ads, but we've got to figure out which one audience we think these ads are aiming at. And as you can see, hopefully, if you're reading along here, one of the first catches or curveballs about the assignment is we have to have one audience, and that audience has to have 2 descriptors or 2 criteria. So for example, y'all might notice me sipping my soda on these videos, big Coca-Cola fanboy here. So I might have I might initially try to come up with a thesis like, hey, Coca-Cola appeals to men. But that doesn't really line up with this assignment, because it's like, hey, that's half the planet, right? So I can't just say like, oh yeah, half the planet. They were trying to aim at half the planet, because the spirit of this assignment is, these companies spend hundreds of thousands, sometimes literally millions of dollars on these ads. An average, like a television ad, is only 30 seconds. So they don't have time to appeal to everybody. So they kind of micro focus, like, we're going to appeal to this group. So we need you to narrow things down. So it's like, would we say it appeals to young men, middle-aged men, older men, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you that you don't have to have age or gender as part of your thesis, but historically it has been the most popular choice for students, because you have to have the 2 criteria. It's usually easier to be like young men or teenage girls, or something like that. But to give you an example, I've got an in-person class that's finishing up this essay now, and I've got somebody that wrote about how her commercials were appealing to risk-taking adventurers. And so that's an example. It's neither, gender nor age, but it still meets the 2 criteria thing. One audience with 2 criteria. And don't worry, as part of this video, we're going to look at some commercials online, and I'll run you through kind of like what this analysis would look like. Now, I will go ahead and tell you something that I think some of my current students may have wished I emphasized a little earlier for them. And that is, what normally happens with this assignment is students will pick like the first 3, advertisements they see for a company they like. And one of those advertisements may have like a very clear audience, but the other 2 don't. So what very often happens is you end up, here's the commercial I definitely want to stick with. And then I'm going to maybe cherry pick 2 more commercials that seem to be appealing to the same audience that the first one is. All right. So once you have all this ready, you can create a thesis. And the good news is the thesis compared to essay 1 is kind of straightforward. You're really just like, I was telling previous classes today, company X appeals to audience Y. So like, for instance, Coca-Cola appeals to young women would be an example of a thesis statement you could do in this paper. So once you have the thesis out there, what are you doing in the paper itself? Well, here's where it gets interesting. Your entire paper is made up of arguments about where you try to convince us this commercial is, or commercials are primarily aimed at this group. So for instance, I might have a body paragraph where say, hey, Coca-Cola appeals to young women in these commercials through their casting. And so then I talk about the cast in these commercials, how and why I think the casting is relatable to this target audience. Target audience would look at some of these things and be like, she's just like me, for real, and then you kind of rinse and repeat. Like you might have a paragraph where you're looking at the music and how the music appeals to the target audience. You can really drill down. You can talk about like the fashion. You can talk about like hairstyles. You can talk about dialogue, plot, slogans, pretty much if you can think of it. Like there's nothing that's off limits as long as you can argue how and why some of the things in this commercial are appealing to that chosen audience. Speaking of things not being off limits, the assignment is deliberately pretty wide open on like anything that's a commercial. So if you guys want to look at like movie trailers or, video game trailers, something like that, that is fair game. All right. So we're about to look at some examples together that I hope will make this assignment make a little more sense. But I did want to tell you, and this is on the assignment, I'm pointing like you can see it, but it's on the assignment. It's on my second monitor. But this is our usual, and I hope you don't hate it too much, but 5 pages, double spaced, Times New Roman, font size 12, pretty much all the stuff that was in place with your first essay. That hasn't changed. Now, one thing that has changed, and maybe for the better, depending on your perspective, is I'm sorry, you didn't have research and essay 1 either. I'm sorry. If y'all were a 16-week class, I would normally start you with a research essay, but I didn't do that. So this hasn't changed, but I'm just reinforcing that no research is required for this particular ad. All right, or for this particular essay about ads. Whew, can you tell it's the end of the week for me? All right, so I've got the world's rattiest speakers turned on over here, so I'm hoping you can hear the audio all right. I always get a little nervous, kind of boomer style, sharing my screen here. I don't know if this stuff's going to work or not, but let us do it. Share screen. Want that one? Yep. All right. So I apologize in advance for the potato quality of this ad. This ad, it was made, I think, back in the 90s, perhaps. And so you can kind of tell the 4:3 formatting of the screen, and it's not the highest quality video. Also, I would like to modulate your expectations, despite the breathless description this person applied here. I don't think this is the world's funniest commercial, probably not by a long shot, but for our purposes, it's a very useful commercial to analyze. So I'm going to play this once. I'm going to shut up, everyone's favorite part. I'll play this once and then talk about how you might analyze this for your paper if you want to. This is just a sample. I mean, if you really want to analyze this, you can, but this is mostly to model what you might do for the commercials you choose.
This is my wedding, and in my wedding, your shoes will be dyed, your nails done. When I say taffeta, you say what color? You eyeballing me, Martinez? Okay, let's get married.
It's amazing the sacrifices you'll make for friendship. When it comes to the taste of Diet Dr. Pepper, you sacrifice nothing. Diet Dr. Pepper tastes more like regular Dr. Pepper.
All right. So, oh, come on. I want to go back. I want to go back to the commercial. There we go. All right. So, one of the things I wanted to just kind of get out of the way early on with this is you can technically argue almost anything. So I'm going to walk you through a sample argument for this particular commercial, but you might be sitting there thinking like, I think it was appealing to this different group entirely. You can write about that. It's always worth emphasizing this, that with these essays, I'm not evaluating whether you are objectively right or objectively wrong, because nobody is objectively right or objectively wrong. Instead, I'm just looking at, the case you make, the arguments you make. I was telling a student this morning, I used to emphasize this to students, and I stopped saying it because I thought I sounded a little like a salesman. But I started telling people, like, it's not what's right or wrong, it's what you can argue or not. So in this essay, in this commercial that we could, modeling for this essay, a low-hanging fruit analysis I might make, I might say, Dr. Pepper is appealing to young women. All right. And there's different reasons for that, but primarily young women, like, unless you count the fellas in the background, like doing some preparation, young women are all we see in this ad. And I realize your mileage may vary. Like for me, I'm saying young women is probably somewhere like 18, 18 to 28 or 20 to 30, something like that. And now what am I going to do? If I were going to turn these into body paragraphs, if I say Dr. Pepper is appealing to young women, all right, then I have to write my body paragraphs about what is in here that it uniquely appeals to young women, or young women would respond to. All right. So one of the things, as I mentioned a minute ago, is the casting. This isn't always the case, especially if there's a celebrity involved, but the vast majority of the time, the people on screen look like the people they're trying to sell to. So if you've got a commercial filled with young men, it's probably aimed at young men. If you've got a commercial filled with young women, it's probably aimed at young women. All right. Now, research is optional in this essay, but research can help us out. For example, the average marriage age in America, I believe, is now around 27. So if we say this is targeting women, 20 to 30 or even 25 to 35, you could say, all right, they're kind of in this sweet spot where it's like, all right, the people watching this, you may be married. If you're part of the target audience, you may be married, or you may have been in someone's bridal party. You might have been the crazy bride, or you might have been Martinez, but you have been. It will be a familiar setting to you. Now, you can also get into the idea, and I'm going to say this very carefully so you don't throw anything through the screen at me. Commercials trade in stereotypes a lot. And so it's okay to talk about how the commercial is using these stereotypes to appeal to a group, even if you don't personally agree with it. So here is an example. If you look at the colors in this commercial, it's like purple, it's light purple, like a lilac, it's pink, it's white. These are colors that are traditionally coded as feminine. And indeed, like if you're like, well, what colors do men like? If you look at what men wear, I didn't do this on purpose, but I'm basically wearing it. It's usually darker colors. Men prefer like navy blues, blacks, browns, those kind of shades. So when you see brighter colors and certain colors, like especially pink, it's feminine coded. Now, that's not me saying you're a girl, you better like pink. But it means that the advertisers sat down, like, we're aiming at young women, so we're going to have these particular colors in here. All right, what's some other stuff we can get into? Well, I mentioned how the wedding might be relatable. So the idea of like a bride or someone else like taking the wedding way too seriously, that is something that, people in this group can relate to. It's like, hey, you have probably had to sit through something like this before. All right, speaking of sitting through things, every now and then I show this commercial to students, and there's a little bit of confusion over who our point of view character is. Like, I'll very often show this. It's like, who do you think this is appealing to? It's like brides. Like, maybe, but I don't think we're supposed to sympathize or empathize with the crazy bridezilla. I think our point of view character is this poor Martinez who she yells at.
You eyeballing me, Martinez?
You eyeballing me, Martinez?
Okay, let's get married.
It's amazing the sacrifices you'll make for friendship. When it comes to the taste of Diet Dr. Pepper, you sacrifice nothing.
All right. So the idea there, if you're in the target audience, Martinez is your point of view character. It's like, oh man, you're putting up with all this crap. You know what it's like to put up with all this crap because of your friend. And at least with the Diet Dr. Pepper, you don't have to sacrifice. Of course, we get the little tag ending here where you know,
Dr. Pepper.
the thing rips. So it's kind of like if you're Martinez, you're kind of getting a sort of, that's karma. That's what you get for being in my face.
Tastes more like Rick.
And then this has been part of their marketing slogans, I think, forever. But the diet that tastes like regular, you could get into the meta idea that like this is aimed at young women. The setting is like, all right, it's a wedding, this is a bridal party. As y'all may or may not know, when you're part of these parties, God, I'm going to be a groomsman in January. When you're part of these parties, sometimes the like formal wear or like dresses or tuxes or whatever are ordered well in advance. And there can be a little bit of anxiety, like, am I still going to fit into this thing in a couple months? So, you know, you could talk about Dr. Pepper's offering these reassurances that you will fit. And if you're really feeling it, you could turn that into a larger meta analysis about how the commercial is preying on the fears of women who are traditionally like, oh, you gotta be thin and you gotta be pretty for everybody. All right, so that's an example of one commercial. I think I'm looking at like in a few minutes here, I got to go teach another class like in person. I think we got time for one more here. So this is technically the same company, Dr. Pepper, but they've got a different product, and as you're about to see, a different audience.
Dr. Pepper 10, manliest low-calorie soda in the history of mankind. Bold flavor.
So some meta context real quick about this. For basically the first 50 years or so after the advent of diet soda, almost all of the diet soda ads were aimed at women. And eventually companies figured out, like, dudes could probably stand to lose a few pounds too. And so Dr. Pepper panicked a little bit, like, man, we spent like half a century saying that 0 calorie is a girly drink. So they invented Deep Sigh, Dr. Pepper 10, full of 10 manly calories, basically reassuring dudes it's okay to drink this stuff. Now, I am notoriously bad at guessing ages, but I've run this commercial with some students before, and the general consensus is that this fella is like middle-aged. So here, looking at this commercial, say Dr. Pepper is aiming at middle-aged men. So just to clarify here, I'm showing you these commercials back to back to show you how different they can be. You wouldn't want to try to analyze both of these commercials in the same paper because they're going to vastly different audiences. But once you pick one, it's like, all right, I'm either going to go with the Dr. Pepper ads aiming for middle-aged men, or I'm going to go for the Dr. Pepper ads aiming for young women. All right, so what is in this commercial to appeal to middle-aged men? Well, part of it's in the song and the setting. He's saying there's no place like no man's land for me, and the idea of like getting away from it all. And this is something that, if you have some older relatives or friends or whatever, you may have heard this. Back in my day, we used to go outside and we drank from the hose and we weren't on the line. There was no online, blah, 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 blah. So you can get in the idea that like for an older audience, this is a very desirable thing. I want to get away from it all. I want to disconnect. I want to be on my own. Now, you can also put on your psychology or sociology hat here and get into some of the things that, you know, like, hey, he's carrying around, you know, one-handed, carrying around this giant tree. You know, what is that supposed to show? Well, it shows he's strong. Yeah, sure. Why is that important, though? Well, you think about middle-aged man, midlife crisis. They worry about the next generation. There's younger, tougher, faster, you know, people. And so you could say that in this commercial, it's appealing to his, you know, his worries. Like, you still got this. Drink your Dr. Pepper, show them how strong you are. Now, I've shown this next bit to students for a while now. I don't know if I'm, no pun intended, barking up the wrong tree, but we have this weird bit where he's just walking by and he rips off a piece of tree bark here and he bites into it. Now, my theory, as a middle-aged man, my theory is that like this symbolizes, if you're really worried about your weight, you're probably eating, or just, you know, your digestive health, you're probably eating a lot of fiber, because that's, you know, that's what you get if you're literally biting into a tree bark. So imagine stuff like a granola bar. And I say this because that's usually what I'm eating at lunch is a granola bar and a diet soda. And so I wondered if there was something going on here where it's like, oh, we know that you're eating this flavorless fiber all the time, but you can at least spruce things up with, a nice flavorful drink. All right, we've got some other stuff going on, like he fishes a literally ice cold drink out of the river here, cracks it open and drinks it. A student one time, just of his own volition, did some research and found out this was a reference to a late 1970s beer ad where a guy fishes an ice cold beer out of the river. So that's another thing where, research helps. It's optional on this paper, but research always helps. But here, research helped the student figure out, like, oh, they're trying to associate, Dr. Pepper and beer. Like, it's refreshing, the same way your beer is. And they're referencing a commercial that, like, probably only middle-aged men would even have seen. It's a reference other people wouldn't get. All right, we've got some vague stuff here about him being like the master of nature. That maybe, again, speaks to middle-aged men being insecure. It's like, hey, you are in control. This is your domain here. The animals will bring him drinks. The animals, row his boat, even all of this stuff. And then at the end, we get the manliest low-calorie soda in the history of mankind. So it's always good to analyze slogans, but this is kind of more of the same. It's like, all right, a middle-aged male audience, they think they've lost it. They think they've lost step. And it's like, no, if you really want to show them you're a super duper manly man, you drink this stuff. And we've even got his little tagline here at the end. Bold flavor. So again, I keep coming back to the idea of middle-aged man, midlife crisis, people that worry that they're set in their ways. And it's like, no, you can do something bold. You can do something adventurous. Even though all we're really doing is watching this guy do the adventurous stuff. And even though the bold thing is just taking a sip of his soda. That's it for this description. Y'all know the deal, I think, by now. If you have any questions about this assignment, about your essay 1, about anything else, feel free to email me or feel free to text me at 863-835-2399. Y'all have a good one. Bye.